I wasn't even supposed to be there. My ex's family still invited me to their winter cabin trip after the breakup. That's the weird part, right? Evan and I ended things 3 months ago, and it wasn't messy or dramatic, just the classic "we've grown apart" speech. He delivered it with that same calm, level voice he used when telling a waiter they got his order wrong. I didn't cry. Not until the Uber ride home. So when his mom texted me in December asking if I was still coming to their annual trip, I figured it was a courtesy thing. I told her thanks, but no thanks. She insisted, said I was family, said Evan wasn't even going to be there this year because he had some work retreat in LA. And then she added, "Grayson's coming though. You two always got along." That should have been my first red flag. Grayson, Evan's younger brother by 2 years, and the exact opposite of him. Where Evan was put together and polished, Grayson was wild. All hoodie strings and chaotic energy. Tattoos Evan hated. Motorcycles Evan really hated, and eyes that made it very hard to hate him back. We were never close, just aware of each other. That kind of unsaid awareness, where you both instinctively know something could happen if it were ever allowed to. But it wasn't, not while I was dating Evan. So yeah, I should have seen it coming when things went sideways. The cabin was 5 hours north of the city, tucked between pine trees and icy back roads that barely made it onto Google Maps. I drove up Friday afternoon in my old Subaru, thermos of coffee in the cup holder, my playlist on shuffle. It felt kind of nice, quiet, familiar. When I pulled up, it was already snowing lightly, and the sun was just starting to sink behind the mountains. The cabin looked like something out of a catalog. Wooden beams, smoke curling from the chimney, soft golden light glowing through the windows. I stepped inside and was instantly hit with warmth, the smell of cinnamon and pine, and the unmistakable sound of Grayson's laugh coming from the kitchen. Not Evan. Grayson. He looked up when I came in, eyes widening for half a second before settling into that lazy smirk of his. "Well, shit," he said. "Didn't think you'd actually come." I shrugged out of my jacket. Neither did I. We were the only two there. Apparently, Evan's mom and stepdad had gotten stuck in town with car trouble and would be coming the next day. His sister had canceled last minute because her daughter caught the flu. So, there we were. Me, Grayson, and 24 hours of awkward, snowy silence stretched in front of us. Except, it wasn't awkward. Not at first. We spent the evening making pasta and half-joking our way through the worst Netflix Christmas movies we could find. He made fun of my music. I roasted his hoodie collection. We played cards, drank hot whiskey, and somewhere between laughing too hard and arguing over Uno rules, it didn't feel weird anymore. It felt easy. Too easy. The storm hit overnight. I woke to howling wind and whiteout conditions outside the window. Snow was coming down sideways, piling up fast. The power flickered, then went out completely. My phone had no signal. Grayson was already up, standing by the front window with a steaming mug in his hand. His hair was a mess, like he'd just rolled out of bed. He turned when he heard me. "Morning," he said. "Hope you weren't planning on leaving today." I stepped closer to the window. "Holy shit." "I know," he said. "We're officially snowed in." I laughed, shaking my head. "Of course we are." He sipped his coffee, then shot me a sideways look. "You good?" I nodded. "Yeah. Just, this is not how I pictured this weekend going." He chuckled. "Same. I thought I'd be third-wheeling your breakfast with Evan." There was a pause. Then he said, quieter, "I didn't know you guys broke up." I looked at him. "Yeah, it was mutual, I guess." He studied me for a moment, like he was trying to read between the lines. Then he nodded and didn't push it. We spent the morning stacking firewood inside and rationing what food we had in case the power stayed out. Grayson found a battery-powered radio and set it up, flipping between static-filled stations until one came through with a storm warning. By noon, the wind had knocked out our reception entirely, and we had no way to call out. It was official. Me and my ex's brother. Trapped. Alone. in a cabin, with no way out. I tried not to let that fact do weird things to my brain. Tried, but then he looked at me a little too long, and I looked back, and the silence between us changed. The weirdest part about being snowed in with Grayson wasn't the isolation, or the cold, or the fact that the wind outside sounded like it was trying to peel the cabin off the mountain. It was how normal it felt. Too normal. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, a blanket draped across both our legs because the fireplace, while doing its best, wasn't exactly built for freak blizzards. Grayson had found a deck of cards and was teaching me some ridiculous game he claimed he made up in high school. "It's basically poker," he said. "It's not poker," I argued. He grinned. "It is if you believe." That grin. God, I forgot he had that kind of smile. Dangerous, offhand, like he didn't even realize how much weight it carried. That same smirk he'd throw at family dinners, when Evan got too serious. Back then, I never let myself linger on it. Now there was nothing stopping my eyes from drifting toward him. He dealt another hand. "So, why'd you guys break up?" There it was, a question I had expected but wasn't ready for. I shrugged, staring down at my cards. "He said we weren't compatible long term." Grayson scoffed softly. "That sounds like Evan." "Yeah." He drummed his fingers on the wooden coffee table. "You agree with him?" I exhaled. "Honestly, I don't know. I think maybe he just checked out before I did." Grayson didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back, pulling the blanket up around both of us again. His shoulder brushed mine, lightly, casually, but my whole body reacted in a way I hoped wasn't obvious. "Then he's an idiot," he said, voice low. I tried to laugh it off. "You're biased." "Maybe." His eyes flicked to mine. "Doesn't make me wrong." The silence stretched again. Not uncomfortable, but charged. The kind of quiet where you can hear the person next to you breathing. The kind where every little movement feels like it means something. Another blast of wind rattled the windows, making us both jump a little. Grayson shook his head. "This storm's insane. I checked outside earlier. Snow's already up to my knees." I groaned. "We really might be stuck for days, huh?" "Yup." Then, teasing, "I'm sure you're thrilled." I didn't say that. He looked at me, and for a second, something shifted between us. Softer, closer. Before either of us could acknowledge it, the lights flickered, once, twice, then died completely. The cabin plunged into darkness, except for the orange glow of the fire. "Great," I muttered. "Round two." Grayson stood up. "Hang on, I think there are candles somewhere." He disappeared down the hall, leaving me alone with the creaking timbers and howling wind. The firelight flickered, casting long shadows across the room. My ankle, still sore from the drive, throbbed faintly. When Grayson returned, he had 3 candles tucked under his arm and a lighter in his hand. He set them around the room, one on the windowsill, one on the table, one on the stone hearth. Warm light slowly filled the room again, soft and golden. "There," he said, plopping down next to me. "Emergency mood lighting," I snorted. "Very romantic." He shot me a look, a playful one, but there was something behind it, something I hadn't expected to see. "You cold?" he asked. "A little." Grayson didn't hesitate. He scooted closer, pulling the blanket over both of us again. His thigh pressed against mine, and this time he didn't shift away. The temperature didn't feel like the reason my chest suddenly felt warm. We played cards a little longer, though neither of us really focused. Eventually, Grayson put the deck down and stretched his arms, letting out a low groan. "Ugh, my back's killing me from sleeping on that crappy guest bed last night." "You picked the wrong room then," I said. "I got the good mattress." He raised a brow. "Oh, and you didn't offer to switch?" "Nope." "Wow, heartless." "Completely." He shook his head dramatically, then reached for his mug, now filled with lukewarm cocoa. The kind Evan would have said was too childish. Grayson took a sip and smiled like it was the best drink on earth. "So," he said casually, "when exactly were you going to tell me Evan's not coming tomorrow?" I blinked. "You knew." At first, no, but the second I got here, your face told me everything. My face? Seriously? Look, I wasn't trying to. I don't care, he interrupted gently. And he meant it. Actually, he hesitated, his eyes drifting to mine again. I'm glad he's not here. For a moment, the only sounds were the fire cracking and the storm beating against the cabin walls. Why? I asked quietly. His gaze didn't waver. Because I don't think we would have talked like this if he was. My heart did something stupid, something warm and confusing. I swallowed. Yeah, probably not. He leaned in just enough that I could feel the heat of him. You hungry? The tension snapped. Just a little. Starving, I said. He stood, offering a hand. Come on, let's raid the kitchen before we're stuck eating dry cereal. When I took his hand, he didn't let go right away. His grip was warm, steady, lingering. And the second he released it, I already wanted it back. The blizzard outside was only getting worse. Inside, something else was only getting stronger. The kitchen was colder than the living room, our breath faintly visible in the dim air as Grayson rummaged through the pantry. The flashlight on the counter kept sliding around. Every time a gust of wind rattled the cabin, casting jittery beams across the cabinets and his face. We've got, he said, pulling out items one by one. Ramen, canned chili, a questionable jar of pickles, and oh my God, what is this peach-flavored protein powder? Who buys this? I snorted. Your brother. He paused, staring at the container like he was deeply offended. That explains everything. I leaned against the counter, my ankle throbbing a little more now that I wasn't distracted. Grayson noticed. You good? He asked, closing the pantry door with his hip. Yeah, just sore. Without asking, he crouched down, gently lifting my pant leg to check my ankle. His hands were warm, unexpectedly careful, and the feeling of his fingers brushing my skin sent awareness right up my spine. It's a little swollen, he murmured. I told you I'm fine, I said, voice a little too soft. He looked up at me from his crouched position, and God, those eyes. We held each other's gaze for a second too long, long enough that the air shifted again, thick and warm despite the cold scraping at the windows. Then he stood, clearing his throat as if snapping himself out of it. All right, he said, grabbing 2 ramen packets. Chef Grayson's gonna fix this. I raised a brow. Oh? You a chef now? I've made ramen approximately 6,000 times. Step aside. His confidence was ridiculous and charming and stupidly attractive. I moved to sit on a stool at the counter while he filled a pot with water from the jug, set it on the gas stove, and used a match to light it. See? He said, gesturing at the flame with a flourish. Skills. Oh yeah, I deadpanned. Gordon Ramsay is shaking. He smirked and tossed a flavor packet at me. Stir that. I opened it slowly, sprinkling it into the heating water while watching him. The way he moved, easy, relaxed, like he wasn't trying to hide anything, was the complete opposite of Evan's quiet precision. And the more I watched him, the more I noticed things I never let myself notice before. The tattoos sneaking up his forearm, the way his hair fell loose in front of his face, the subtle scar by his eyebrow he'd gotten skateboarding years ago. He caught me looking. What? He asked. Nothing. Liar. Shut up. He laughed, and for a moment it didn't feel like I was stuck in a cabin with my ex's brother. It felt like I was just here, with someone who made everything easier when the world outside was falling apart. When the ramen was done, we ate on the couch, huddled under the same blanket again. The fire crackled softly, candles flickering around the room. It was warm, cozy, way too intimate for 2 people who were supposed to be nothing to each other. At one point, Grayson nudged my knee with his. You know, he said, you look happier now than when you were with Evan. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. That's random. It's true, though, he said, leaning back. He made everything so serious all the time. You always looked like you were worried you'd mess something up. My chest tightened a little because he wasn't wrong. He just liked things a certain way, I said quietly. Grayson met my eyes. You don't have to bend yourself into a shape that fits someone else. I looked away, heat creeping up my neck. He wasn't supposed to say things like that. He wasn't supposed to notice things like that. Anyway, he continued, softer now, I like seeing you laugh. I felt that. Not just heard it, felt it. Before I could respond, the wind slammed into the cabin again. So hard the window pane groaned. The flame in the fireplace dipped, then flared again. Grayson set his bowl down and stood. Hold on, he said. I want to check something. He grabbed one of the lanterns and went to the back door, opening it just enough to peek outside. A blast of freezing wind whipped into the cabin. Snow blew in like powdered glass. Jesus, I shivered. Close the door. He slammed it shut, locking it. Okay, he said, brushing snow off his sleeve. So the door is halfway buried. Like, literally halfway under the snow. I blinked slowly. Meaning? Meaning we're not getting out tonight. Or tomorrow morning. Or possibly at all unless a search team comes. My stomach dropped. Awesome. He walked back to me, shoving his cold hands under the blanket without warning. I yelped. Grayson! He laughed, curling his freezing fingers around my thigh like it was the most natural thing in the world. What? He smirked. You're warm. You can't just... I just did. I shoved him, trying not to laugh, trying not to react to how close he suddenly was. His knee brushed mine again, his shoulder bumped mine, his hair falling into his eyes as he grinned. Then, in the middle of the commotion, another gust of wind hit so hard the lights flickered. The air crackled. The fire popped loudly. The whole cabin shook for a moment, and instinctively, without thought, Grayson's arm came around me. Just a reflex, just a steadying hold, but he didn't pull away. Not immediately. Not for a long moment. His hand rested on my side, warm, firm, secure. I swallowed hard. You okay? He asked, voice quieter now. I nodded. Yeah, just startled. He kept his arm around me another second, maybe two. His chest brushed my shoulder. His breath warmed the back of my neck. Then he pulled away slowly. Storm's bad, he murmured. Really bad. There was something in his voice he wasn't saying. Something that hung between us, heavy and undeniable. And even though I should have been scared of the storm, all I could feel was the heat spreading beneath my skin, creeping up my chest, catching fire in all the places his hands had been. Outside, the world was a wall of white. Inside, the space between us was getting dangerously small. The storm only got louder as the night dragged on. Every gust felt like it was shaking the entire cabin frame, and the windows whined under the weight of the snow piling against them. It was the kind of weather that made you understand how people got stuck in the mountains for days and ended up eating canned beans like they were delicacies. The worst part? There was nothing to do but wait. Grayson tried to play it cool, leaning back, tossing a pillow up and catching it like he wasn't worried. But every few minutes, his eyes flicked toward the front door as if expecting it to blow open. I pulled the blanket tighter around myself. You sure we're gonna be okay? He nodded once, not fully convincing. We've got firewood, food, and each other. We'll be fine. The last part came out softer than he meant. He looked away quickly, pretending to fuss with the fire. I didn't call him out on it. Instead, I cleared my throat. Should we check the windows? Make sure they're not cracking or something? Yeah, he said, grabbing a lantern. Let's do a sweep. We went room to room, the lantern throwing warm orange light across the wood paneling. The cabin felt older suddenly, more fragile, as the wind screamed outside. In the guest bedroom, snow hissed against the window so fiercely I couldn't even see out. Damn, I muttered. Feels like we're inside a snow globe someone's shaking too hard, Grayson snorted. A really shitty snow globe. We moved down the hall. In the small storage room, something rattled in the vents, making both of us jump. Probably just tree branches, he said. Probably. We stepped back into the hallway, but before we could move on, the lantern flickered. The fire had dimmed too. The temperature dropped enough that I could see my breath again. Shit, Grayson murmured. We need more firewood. We headed toward the back door where we'd stacked some earlier. But when Grayson tried to open it, the door pushed back with frightening resistance. He grunted, forcing it open an inch, then stopped. Oh, hell no. What? He stepped back and angled the lantern so I could see. Snow. A wall of it. Packed tight against the entire doorframe, at least 3 feet high. Probably more beyond what we could see. We're sealed in, he said slowly. Like, completely sealed. Ice slid down my spine. So, we're really stuck, he nodded once. Yeah, we're really stuck. A long silence stretched between us. There was something about realizing you physically couldn't leave that made everything suddenly real. The storm, the isolation, the fact that it was just the two of us. I swallowed. Guess we go back to the fire. He offered a hand to help me step over a drift inside the doorway. My ankle throbbed, and he noticed immediately. Come here, he said, his voice firmer now. Before I could argue, he scooped an arm around my back and supported most of my weight as we walked. It wasn't dramatic, but the closeness hit me harder than it should have. His body heat was immediate, his breath brushing my cheek. For a second, I felt dizzy from more than just the pain. Back in the living room, he eased me onto the couch. Don't move, he said. He grabbed logs from the indoor stack, adding them carefully to the fire. Sparks flared, warming the room again. When he was done, he brushed the ash off his hands and came back to sit beside me. We were closer this time, not because of the blanket or convenience. Just closer. You okay? He asked. Yeah, thanks. His eyes flicked to my ankle. Let me check it again. Before I could protest, he gently lifted my leg, pulling the blanket back, enough to see the swelling. His fingers brushed my skin. Slow, careful, tracing just enough to make my breath catch. You should have told me it was getting worse, he murmured. I didn't want to be dramatic. You're literally stuck in a blizzard with a messed up ankle. You get to be dramatic. His hand stayed on my leg a second too long before he realized it. He pulled back slightly, but not entirely. Not enough to break the tension building between us like heat rising. We'll keep it elevated, he said quietly. It'll help. I nodded. The fire crackled loudly, filling the silence neither of us dared to break. Eventually, he grabbed another blanket from the chair and threw it over both of us. Our shoulders brushed. Then our thighs. The warmth between us grew, an invisible current pulsing in the small space. You're freaking freezing, he muttered. We both are. He hesitated. Then, without asking, he shifted closer. So close our sides touched fully, and wrapped an arm behind me, his hand settling near my hip. Not touching it. Just there. I didn't know if I should move. I didn't want to. After a few minutes of quiet, he spoke again. Can I ask something? I hummed. Sure. Did you ever miss us? Not the family, I mean, me? My chest tightened. Yeah, I did. He breathed out slowly, like he'd been holding it in for years. I missed you too, he said. I turned to look at him. His face was inches from mine. The firelight made the curve of his jaw glow, made the freckles across his nose look softer, younger. His eyes flicked to my lips for just a fraction of a second. Everything inside me went still. And then, boom, a massive thud shook the cabin, like something heavy had slammed against the roof. Snow dust fell from the rafters, the whole room groaning under the storm's weight. Grayson instantly grabbed me, pulling me closer on instinct. You okay? He whispered, his breath hitting my cheek. Yeah, I whispered back, my heart pounding. We stayed like that, arms tangled, faces close, breaths mingling, while the storm roared above us. Neither of us moved. Neither of us looked away. And for the first time that night, I wasn't sure what scared me more, the blizzard outside, or the way he was looking at me like he'd been waiting years for this moment. The roof kept groaning under the weight of the storm, loud enough that we both instinctively held our breath. Snow slid somewhere above us with a slow, heavy scrape that made the rafters tremble. But even then, even through the noise, the cold, the fear, Grayson didn't let go. His arms stayed around me, firm and warm. My shoulder fit naturally against his chest, like gravity had already decided for us. "You think something fell?" I whispered. He nodded, his breath brushing my hair. "Yeah, maybe a big branch, or half the mountain." Comforting. He huffed a soft laugh, but I could feel his heart pounding against my side, faster than he wanted me to notice. When the rumbling finally died down, he eased back just enough to look at me, but not far enough to break the closeness. His face was right there, inches away, firelight flickering against the angles of his jaw, his cheekbones, the faint freckles scattered near his nose. We stared at each other, suspended in a moment that felt too still for how violently the storm raged outside. "You scared?" he asked quietly. "A little." "Me too." It was the honesty in his voice that got me. Grayson wasn't the type to admit fear easily. He always had that reckless confidence. Skateboards, motorcycles, bad decisions in tattoo shops, that made it seem like nothing fazed him. But here, in this tiny cabin, with the world howling around us, he was letting me see something real, something vulnerable. His fingers brushed mine under the blanket, barely a touch, more like a question. I didn't pull away, he noticed. And that tiny shift, that was when everything changed. The fire snapped loudly, making us both jump a little, and the moment broke just enough for Grayson to clear his throat and lean back the slightest bit. The awkwardness didn't feel bad. It felt charged, like the air was on the verge of sparking. "You warm enough?" he asked. I nodded. "You?" he snorted. "Probably the warmest I've been all night." Then he immediately turned red, realizing how that sounded. I raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah?" he groaned, dragging a hand over his face. "Don't. I didn't mean—" "It's fine." I laughed softly. "Really?" He dropped his hand and stared at me, and for a moment, neither of us was laughing. His eyes flicked to my lips again. Quick, nervous, almost involuntary. It did something to me. Something I hadn't felt in months. Something I'd never felt with him before. Because back then, when I was with Evan, I never allowed myself to notice Grayson in that way. I never let myself register how attractive he was, how easy he made me feel, how he always seemed to fill a room with warmth even when he was quiet. Now, in the silence of this storm, it was impossible not to see it. The tension building was almost unbearable, not dramatic or movie-like, just human, real, like two people who had been orbiting each other for too long. He cleared his throat again. "We should probably check the fireplace. Last thing we need is smoke backing up if the chimney gets blocked." "Good idea." He was gone for only a minute, but the room felt colder without him next to me. When he came back, brushing snow dust off his shoulders, he shut the door firmly against the wind. "Chimney's fine," he said. "But the back of the cabin, the snow's up to the window." I blinked. "Like the whole window?" "Yeah." "That's horrifying?" I was going to say impressive, but sure. He smirked, walking back toward the couch. But instead of taking the other end like before, he sat right next to me. Close enough that our legs touched again. Close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him. I didn't move away. He didn't either. The storm raged on. A constant, relentless roar. But inside the cabin, a different kind of pressure built. Slow, quiet, incredibly delicate. The kind you felt deep in your chest. "So," Grayson said, trying for casual and failing, "can I ask you something without it being weird?" "That depends," I said, leaning back into the cushions. "What's the question?" He exhaled, looking everywhere except my face. "When you and Evan were together, did you ever wonder if things might have worked with someone else?" My heartbeat kicked, hard. "That's complicated," he nodded. "You don't have to answer if it's messed up." "It's not messed up," I said. "Just honest." He swallowed, waited, and even though I wasn't planning on saying it, the words came anyway. I didn't leave Evan thinking about someone else. I said slowly, but sometimes I wondered if the things I wanted, he wasn't capable of giving. Grayson's eyes softened. Like what? Warmth, I said, surprising even myself. Playfulness. Someone who actually made me feel seen. Someone who wasn't just checking boxes. Grayson's jaw tightened, not in anger, more like a quiet reaction he didn't want me to notice. But I noticed. Heaven's not a bad guy, I continued. We just weren't right for each other, he finished gently. Yeah. There was a pause. Then, what if someone was right for you? He asked, voice even quieter now. I felt the weight of the question settle between us like another blanket. Then I'd want to know, I whispered. Grayson's breath hitched, a tiny, barely audible sound, but he heard mine do the same. Slowly, he shifted his hand under the blanket again. This time, he didn't hesitate. He took my hand fully, fingers sliding between mine. Warm. Sure. Intentional. The kind of touch that meant something. Outside, the wind slammed hard against the cabin again, but I barely heard it. The storm wasn't what had my heart racing anymore. Grayson leaned in just slightly, so slightly I couldn't tell if he was moving or if I was imagining it. His voice was barely above a breath when he said, I wanted you to know for a long time. I stared at him, lips parting, breath stuck somewhere in my chest. But before either of us could move, a loud crack split the air from the back of the cabin. Not snow, not wind, something else. Grayson was on his feet instantly. What the hell was that? My stomach dropped. Is something breaking? He grabbed the lantern, jaw tight, eyes suddenly alert. Stay here, he said, but I was already standing, ignoring the throb in my ankle. Grayson? He looked back at me, expression tight, something protective flickering behind his eyes. Don't worry, he said. I've got you. And then he stepped into the dark hallway, while the storm clawed at the cabin walls like something alive. Whatever just happened was only going to bring us closer. Grayson disappeared down the hallway with the lantern, his silhouette flickering against the wood-paneled walls as the storm wailed outside. Every few seconds, a gust of wind hit the cabin hard enough to make the floorboards tremble beneath my feet. I didn't like being separated. Not in a situation like this. Not with whatever that cracking sound was still echoing in my head. Grayson? I called out. Hang on, his voice echoed back. Calm, but purposeful. I took a few steps toward the hall, trying not to aggravate my ankle. The cold had crept into the edges of the cabin again, and each breath left a faint puff in the air. The fire crackled behind me, but its warmth didn't reach this far. Don't go far, he added quickly. Floor might be unstable. That didn't make me feel any better. I leaned on the doorway, peering down the dim corridor. Can you see anything? His lantern light shifted toward the back room. The noise came from the storage closet, I think. What kind of noise? He hesitated, a beat too long. I'm checking. The second he said it, the storm slammed against the cabin again, harder than before. Snow hammered the roof. The window pane behind me groaned like it was bending inward. I hated standing still. Hated not being able to see him. Hated the idea of him dealing with something alone while I waited like a helpless idiot. Grayson, I'm coming. No. Hey, wait. Too late. I limped down the hallway, sliding a hand along the wall for balance. When I reached him, he shot me an exasperated look that did nothing to hide the worry in his eyes. I said to stay put, he muttered. You said the floor might be unstable. You expect me to sit and relax after that? He opened his mouth, probably to argue, but then he shook his head and sighed. Okay, fine. Just stay close. He nudged the storage room door open with his foot. The lantern's glow spilled into the small space. At first, nothing looked wrong. Boxes, extra blankets, old snow boots, a busted rocking chair from when his mom tried DIY refurbishing. Then I saw it. The ceiling beam in the corner had cracked straight through. A thick line split the wood, sagging just enough to be threatening. Snow had blown in through a high vent, leaving a pile on the floor. "Shit," Grayson breathed, stepping inside for a closer look. The beam creaked, a long, low groan that made the hairs on my arms lift. "Don't go under it," I snapped, grabbing his jacket. He froze, looked up. "You're right," he said quietly. "It's compromised. If the snow on the roof gets heavier, it'll collapse." I finished. We stood in silence, listening to the relentless wind battering the cabin. "Does this room connect to anything important?" I asked. "Not really. But the corridor does. If this section gives out, it'll take half the hallway with it. And we're trapped on this side," he nodded grimly. "Which means we should block the door. If the beam falls, I don't want you anywhere near it." I huffed. "Stop acting like I'm the fragile one. You're injured," he said, voice firm. "And I'm not losing you in a storm I dragged you into. You didn't drag me anywhere." He stepped in close before I could finish. Close enough that the lantern light warmed his face, close enough that the snow melting in his hair dripped down his jawline. His eyes were dark, intense, too open. "You're here because of my family," he murmured. "And because I wanted you here more than I should have." My heart went tight in my chest. "You didn't force this situation," I whispered. "None of it is your fault." "Still," he said softly, "I'm not risking you getting hurt." He brushed a stray snowflake from my cheek with his thumb. Slow, deliberate. That one tiny touch sent a warmth through me so sharp I forgot about the storm entirely. But then, a deep, loud crack ripped through the room again. We both jumped back from instinct. "Okay, time to move," Grayson said quickly. He grabbed my hand without hesitation, his fingers threading through mine like he'd been waiting to do it for months. He pulled me back toward the main room as the beam behind us groaned under the weight of the storm. Once we were safely out, he shut the storage door and shoved a heavy chair in front of it. Then he exhaled shakily. "We're good. It's sealed." I nodded, leaning on the wall. My heartbeat was still racing, not just from fear. He turned toward me, and for a moment, the tension in the air returned. Thicker, heavier, unmistakably charged. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I murmured. "Are you?" He laughed under his breath. "Not even close." The admission hit me harder than I expected. He rubbed the back of his neck, the lantern swaying gently in his other hand. His gaze drifted over my face, lingering just a little too long. "Come back to the fire," he said. "It's colder in the hallway." We returned to the living room. The firelight washed over us again, turning the chaos outside into nothing but distant noise. Grayson set the lantern down and sat beside me, closer than before. Our knees touched, then stayed touching. The rest of the cabin creaked and moaned with the storm, but in this moment, none of it mattered. "I didn't think I'd see you again like this," he said suddenly. "Just us. No family, no Evan, no pretending." "Pretending what?" I asked. He met my eyes with an honesty that made my pulse skip. "You know what?" I swallowed, throat tight. "Grayson." He shook his head slowly, like he wasn't asking for my permission, like he was asking for my truth. "You feel it too," he said softly. "Don't you?" The storm slammed against the cabin again, but I barely heard it. Because he was right, and there was no point pretending anymore. We were two people trapped inside a shrinking space, both by the blizzard and by the gravity pulling us closer with every passing second. I breathed in. He breathed in. The fire popped, and the storm kept raging, but for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted it to stop. The storm had become a kind of white noise. Violent, constant, almost rhythmic, like the world outside had vanished, and the cabin existed in its own suspended moment. Grayson sat beside me on the couch, our knees pressed together, our shoulders practically touching. A single blanket wrapped around both of us, but the warmth between us wasn't coming from the fabric. It was coming from him. from the way he looked at me, like he'd run out of excuses to pretend he didn't want to. His voice was low, almost careful. If this is weird, tell me. I'll stop. I didn't answer right away. Not because I was unsure, but because my heart was hammering so loudly I wasn't sure words would come out right. He waited. And when I finally spoke, it felt like something inside me clicked into place. "It's not weird," I said quietly. "It's complicated." He let out a slow breath. "Complicated I can handle." "Grayson," I said, "you're my ex's brother. I know. And this, whatever this is probably a bad idea." He nodded. "Probably. And it's happening in the middle of a blizzard while we're stuck in a literal wooden box?" He cracked a tiny smile. "Also true. Which means," I said, swallowing, "we should be careful." He nodded again. Slower this time. But something in his expression softened. "Okay," he whispered. "So let's be careful." He didn't move closer. He didn't touch me. He didn't push. He just waited, his eyes locked on mine, letting the silence build between us like something fragile and electric. Outside, the storm screamed. Inside, everything felt impossibly still. My ankle throbbed softly, but the pain somehow grounded me, reminding me this was real. Grayson shifted slightly, adjusting the blanket over my legs, his fingers brushing my knee in a way that felt intentional, even if it wasn't. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable," he said. "You're not." He exhaled slowly, relieved. "Good." A gust slammed against the cabin so hard the fire flickered. Instinctively, we both looked toward the window. The snow was plastered so thick against the glass it looked like the world had erased itself. Grayson reached for a log and tossed it into the fire. Sparks shot up the chimney. The warm glow lit his face, softening the sharp lines, catching the brightness in his eyes. "Can I tell you something?" he asked, voice quieter now. "Yeah," I said. He rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly shy. "I wasn't going to come on this trip." "Why not?" "Because I knew you might be here." He paused. "And I didn't trust myself around you." My breath caught. "Around me? Why?" He hesitated, jaw flexing like he was deciding whether to tell the truth or not. Then he did. "Because I've liked you for a long time," he said. "Longer than I should have." The words hit me like a rush of heat. Sudden. Overwhelming. "Grayson, I'm not trying to disrespect Evan," he said quickly. "I know how this sounds. I know the timing is insane, and that we're stuck in here, and maybe that's making everything more intense, but—" "Grayson," I repeated, louder this time. He finally shut up. I took a breath. I didn't know." He scoffed softly. "How could you? I spent the entire year pretending I didn't feel anything." "Why?" His eyebrows pulled together. "Because he was with you." There was so much sincerity in his voice it almost hurt. "And because you were happy," he added. "Or I thought you were." I stared at him, the truth sinking in deeper than I expected. All those moments I brushed off. Him standing in doorways watching us talk, the way he lingered in the kitchen when I visited. The silent looks I never understood. They suddenly made sense. "Why didn't you say anything after we broke up?" I asked. He let out a slow, shaky breath. "Because I didn't want to be a rebound. Or a lonely night thing. Or the guy who waited for scraps." My chest tightened. "You aren't." He looked at me like he was trying to believe it but didn't want to hope too much. "And," he added softly, "I didn't think you'd ever look at me the same way." "Grayson, don't say something you don't mean," he whispered. "Not just because we're stuck here, not because the storm is messing with your head." I reached out and took his hand. He froze. His eyes flicked to where our fingers intertwined. Slowly, disbelievingly, like he needed to confirm it was actually happening. "I'm not confused," I said quietly. "And I'm not saying it because we're trapped or scared or bored." His throat bobbed as he swallowed. Then why are you saying it? I met his gaze. Because I've been trying not to look at you like this, and I'm tired of pretending. He stared at me like the world had shifted beneath his feet, like someone had finally said the words he'd been waiting for. The fire popped loudly. His thumb brushed mine, tentative, reverent, like he was afraid I'd disappear. He moved a fraction closer. Just a fraction. Can I? He murmured. The question hung in the air, warm, heavy, real. I didn't trust my voice, so I nodded. Grayson leaned in slowly, painfully slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull back. I didn't, but just as his forehead touched mine, just as our breaths mingled, just as heat surged through my stomach, a massive blast of wind slammed against the cabin. The door rattled violently. We jolted apart as a loud crack split through the air, this time from the front of the cabin. What now? He muttered, grabbing the lantern again. My heart thudded as I stood carefully. Grayson. Stay behind me, he said. But as we approached the door, both of us stopped dead. There, pushing in through the cracks of the door, spilling onto the floor, was snow. Fresh, cold snow. Meaning the storm wasn't just burying us anymore. It was forcing its way inside. Grayson cursed under his breath. Okay, that's not good. The wind screamed. The door creaked inward, and suddenly, we weren't safe anymore. Not from the storm, not from the cabin, and definitely not from what was about to happen next. For a second, all we could do was stare at the door, as snow leaked through the cracks. It came in thin lines at first, like the cold had found a way to infiltrate the one warm space we'd carved out for ourselves. Then another hard blast of wind slammed into the cabin. The hinges groaned, the frame shuddered. The latch bent. Not much, but enough to make both of us swear under our breath. Okay, Grayson said, stepping forward. We need to reinforce it. Now. He grabbed the heaviest furniture in reach, the coat rack, the thick wooden chair, the end table stacked with candles. I limped forward to help, but he shot me a glare that practically said, don't even think about it. I can move things, I argued. You can barely put weight on your ankle. He wasn't wrong. But I still helped push a chest against the door while he wedged the chair under the handle. Once everything was braced, we stepped back, breathing hard. Outside, the storm howled louder, hitting the cabin in sharp bursts. Snow built up against the door enough that it bowed inward like something trying to break through. I swallowed. Is it going to hold? He looked at the door, then at me. Yeah, he said. But his eyes told the truth. He wasn't sure. The fire cracked behind us, the only thing grounding us in that moment. Grayson scrubbed a hand over his face and let out a long, shaky breath. We should stay in the living room, he said. Middle of the cabin is safest, nothing overhead that can collapse. Got it. He knelt in front of me. Let me see your ankle. You already did. I'm checking it again. He lifted my leg gently onto the couch cushion. His fingers brushed my skin with that same careful intensity he always seemed to have around me. Like I was breakable, like touching me meant something. I'm fine, I said. You're not, he murmured, still focused. And you don't have to be. The way he said it, soft, quiet, like a secret, it made my chest pull tight. Grayson. He finally looked up. His face was right in front of mine again. Closer than before. Closer than what could be brushed off as concern or instinct. The firelight flickered across his eyes, warming them, softening them. He was all rough edges and tenderness at once. Messy hair, flushed cheeks, a tiny smudge of soot on his jaw. I reached up without thinking and brushed that smudge away. His breath caught. Everything that had been building, every lingering touch, every quiet look, every moment of hesitation, pulled taut between us like a string. Before the storm breaks the door, he whispered, before something else slams or falls or scares you, just tell me. Tell me I'm not imagining this. You're not imagining it, I said. His shoulders dropped with relief so real it made my throat tighten. Okay, he breathed. Okay. He shifted up onto the couch next to me. moving slowly, giving me space to stop him. I didn't. Our knees pressed together again. His arm brushed mine. His breath warmed the side of my face. "Earlier," he said, voice barely a murmur, "when you said you were tired of pretending, I didn't know what to do with that." "What did you want to do?" He huffed a tiny laugh. "Exactly what I'm doing right now." His hand slid over mine, fingers threading between mine deliberately, confidently. The kind of touch that didn't ask permission because the answer was already written in the way we'd been looking at each other. I squeezed back. The wind wailed outside, rattling the door again, but the sound barely reached me anymore. We were already leaning toward each other, slowly, steadily, quietly, like two magnets that had finally stopped fighting gravity. I could feel the warmth of his breath before our lips even touched, and when we finally did, it wasn't rushed, it wasn't frantic, it wasn't about the storm or fear or adrenaline. It was soft, warm, intentional. His hand cradled my jaw, thumb brushing the edge of my cheekbone. My fingers curled into the fabric of his hoodie, pulling him closer. He kissed me like he'd wanted to for a long time, like he had imagined it, like he was memorizing it. When we finally pulled back, his forehead rested against mine. "Tell me that wasn't just a storm thing," he whispered. "It wasn't. Tell me you're not going to regret it." "I won't." He let out a breath that sounded like he'd been holding it in for months. We stayed like that for a long moment, breathing each other in while the storm battered the world outside. Eventually, he pulled the blanket tighter around both of us and settled beside me, letting me lean against his chest. His arm wrapped around me slowly, carefully, like he didn't want to rush a second of it. "You know," he murmured, "once this storm ends, things are going to get complicated." "Yeah," I said softly, "but I'm not afraid of complicated." He nodded against my hair. "Good, because I'm not letting this go." I smiled. "Me neither." We stayed curled together by the fire, listening to the storm slowly lose its rage. The door held. The cabin held. And even though tomorrow would require explanations and awkward conversations and 1,000 choices, tonight was simple, warm, quiet, real. And as the first calm settled over the mountains, Grayson whispered, "I'm really glad you came, you know." I slipped my fingers back through his. "Yeah," I said. "Me too."